50 years ago, 12-year-old Chanie Wenjack ran away from a residential school in Northern Ontario. He froze to death, alone, and hundreds of kilometers from home. It's a tragic story, and it's at the heart of the new book, Wenjack, by novelist Joseph Boyden. He is a Giller Prize-winning writer whose previous works of fiction include The Arenda, 3-Day Road, and Through Black Spruce. And Joseph Boyden joins us now. Welcome, Joseph.
Hi, how are you?
It's nice to meet you.
You too.
Here is the only known picture of Chanie Wenjack. Who was he?
He was a 12-year-old Anishinaabe boy, Ojibwe boy from Ogoki Post in Northern Ontario, far north of Ontario. Sweet little kid, one of thousands and thousands taken away forcefully from his family and put into a residential school, quite a bleak and tough school. And he was just a little innocent boy who decided one afternoon in October to go back home to his family, so he ran away with a couple of friends.
Why did you decide to tell his story?
You know, it's funny. It's I don't know if it's so much I decided to tell his story as he decided for me to tell it. You know, it originally came around Gord Downey from the Tragically Hip. His brother Mike Downey gave Gord an old 1967 Maclean's article about this little boy, and Gord in turn gave it to me, and I read it, and I was like, this just, wow, what a story. And I knew, you know, I've been involved in with the Truth Reconciliation Commission, I'm an honorary witness, etc. But I knew, you know, thousands of children had died in these schools, but here was a real life example of this sweet little kid who had run away and not made it home. And so Gord and Mike and I talked about, bandied about a few ideas of maybe me writing a small book and then making a movie of it, and then we eventually just went to our creative corners and started creating our own projects.
And why did you think it was important to do this?
Well, you know, the sad thing is that morbidly, we could have chosen one of thousands of children who didn't survive residential schools. Mm-hmm. The Truth Reconciliation Commission has collected thousands of names already, and fear the number might be as high as 30,000 students who didn't make it home.
But they don't know the numbers because...
We don't know the numbers. The government purposely did not keep records. You know. These residential schools were the only schools that I've ever heard of where cemeteries were built beside them because they knew that so many of the children weren't going to make it through disease, malnutrition, abuse, unfortunately.
That's shocking because if that happened today, people would be like, I'm not sending my child there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But, you know, I really, when it came to Chanie, Charlie, the teachers called him, he so strongly spoke to me, and he spoke to Gord, obviously, and a number of other people. He just wouldn't let me go. And when it came time to write something, his voice just started speaking to me.
I was reading this on the train, and I started to cry. It's heartbreaking. No, it's an important story to know. Yeah. I actually had to get off the train. Writing it, getting in his head, finding his voice, what was it like for you?
You know, I sometimes speak about it for fear, though, that people think I'm crazy. But oftentimes, you know, as a writer, and I think this happens to other writers too, we start hearing a voice in our head. And as writers, we're not just allowed to hear the voices, we're encouraged to hear them. But with him, Chanie, his voice came through so strong. It was as if this kid was saying, I don't want to be gone yet, don't forget me. And so to capture his voice was one of those rare moments as a writer where it flowed to me. He told me what he needed to say, and so I just listened. I listened carefully. I
wanted to read you an excerpt from your book, which is always strange, because you're sitting right there. And you write, she can see something in him, she thinks. Someone hurt him bad. Ever bad, they hurt him. So bad that it is stuck inside him, and he's so scared of it, but more scared to let it out. She watches as the boy sits down by the fire, and she thinks she sees his shoulders quiver. She stares at him, but she won't move her eyes. She dares him with her dark eyes to tell her why it hurts. If he could, what do you think Chanie would tell her?
If he was able to, he'd say, I've been hurt bad here, and all I want to be is home with my mom and my dad, who I love very much, and my sisters, who I love very much, and my 2 dogs that I've had to leave in the care of my sisters and ask them to take care of until I got back home. But I got to go back home now. Somebody at that school is hurting me very badly. And it's a brutal thing. It happened to thousands of students.
And that's the sexual abuse, which you write about in the book.
Yep, it's rough, it's bad. And I think as Canadians, we have to recognize that this is an ugly, ugly thing that happened to thousands of kids. It might not have always been sexual abuse, but it was rampant in many of these schools. Certainly physical abuse was the norm. Emotional abuse was the norm. Imagine being taken away. One day you're playing with your friends and some strange person who's not the color you are comes to the door with a gun and says, "I'm taking your children from you." And you say no, and they say, "Well, you're going to jail if you don't let me, and we're taking the children anyways." And they forcefully take your children and put them in these places, these cold institutions, and change their clothing and change their hair. And if you speak your language, if you speak English, they beat you and feed you soap. If your sibling is in the school with you, they will not allow you to speak to your sibling for fear that you will continue speaking your language or speaking of your religion. They won't let you practice your religion, eat your food. Picture this if you were an everyday person now, and it's almost impossible to imagine. What is this, Nazi Germany? It wasn't. This was Canada up until 1996. The last residential school closed its doors. And so this is, I think, and I don't talk about this to make Canadians feel bad about themselves. It's not what the point is. At this point...
But why not? I always feel, why not? Because if it's part of history, and I never learned about this, and I learned about the residential schools on Twitter through social media.
Yeah.
So if it's a part of the history, we should all feel badly about it.
I think feeling badly, absolutely, sure, but we have to go beyond that. Oh, I feel so sorry. Next, why don't they just get over this? I hear this all the time. Why don't Indigenous people just get over this? This happened a long time ago. This has happened for 7 generations, and there's something called intergenerational trauma that we have to recognize as a real and living.
And what is that?
It's the trauma that so many young people experience now. For example, in Attawapskat, I wrote about it, where there's the suicide epidemics that blossom like black flowers in these northern communities. Generations of children taken from their parents and then become parents only to have their children taken away from them. It's going to have a very, very negative and corrosive effect on family. For Indigenous people, and I rarely talk about Indigenous people in a pan-Indigenous way, but if there's something I've seen across this country that is important to all of the Indigenous cultures, it's family. And what the residential schools attempted to do for 140 years was tear apart that social fabric of family, the very thing that allows you to grow and grow strong and to learn your world and your language. Languages were taken away. Religion, songs, dance, you weren't allowed to do any of this in most of these schools anymore. And that's going to have a huge impact on the generations to come. So that, in a nutshell, is intergenerational trauma. The suicide, I tie directly the suicide epidemics. A lot of the alcohol abuse that we hear on a lot of reserves is the direct fallout of this. In the same breath, I must say, though, that Indigenous people across this country are the most resilient people. The fastest growing population in our country is First Nations youth. There's so many amazing and beautiful examples of resilience and of people getting beyond and being strong and doing amazing things, but we don't often hear those stories. The stories of Tanya Tagaq, the throat singer, or the Tribe Called Red creatively, or I could just go on and on, Hayden King or Tyagi Alfred, the great academics. There are so many positive examples of very strong Indigenous people. So we must always kind of counterbalance the pain with the positive. But going back to the why shouldn't people feel badly? They should, of course. And if they're going to feel badly, it's that they should feel badly that the institutions that taught us never mentioned any of this. Residential schools were an unknown thing until very recently for most Canadians. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the apology by Harper, Trudeau's work. He's working hard to try to make reconciliation and nation-to-nation dialogue happen.
How do you think he's doing a year after?
I think, it's a year, and nothing is going to change completely in a year. His heart is in the right place. I know it. Financially, he wants it to happen. I know it. It's a very complicated road, but it's an absolutely necessary road to walk. Reconciliation. We can't just give up, and he knows that. So I think he's doing well. He knows that his heart is there, and he knows that things have to change, and we have to have a nation-to-nation relationship now with the different nations of this country, and that's a complicated matter, so it's going to take some time.
I want to pick up on that in a second, but I wanted to show the Heritage Minute that you wrote about Chanie. Let's take a look.
Chanie wanted to go back home. It was 1,000 kilometers away. They forced him to go to the Indian residential school. More than 150,000 of us children had to go. They wanted to change us.
Our Father in heaven,
hallowed
hallowed be your name.
Hallowed be your name.
Thy kingdom come,
Thy kingdom come.
thy will be done.
Thy will be done.
Kill the Indian and the child. It's been called cultural genocide. I survived residential school. My brother Chanie did not.
That just sends chills up my
not
spine.
The easiest, yeah.
I mean, Heritage Minutes are usually celebrating Canadian history, but why is it important, even more important, to tell the darker sides of Canada's history?
If we're going to grow as a nation, if we're going to really become truly a nation, and many of us will argue that we're not there yet, we have to accept our responsibilities as historically as a people, as the settler people, and what we have done to the Indigenous people in this country. Again, the fastest growing population in this country is First Nations youth. There's no way that we're going to move forward unified and be everything that Canada can be without being more inclusive and allowing Indigenous people to say, you be inclusive with us, rather than it's always been the I'm the boss, you're the Indian kind of thing, and that relationship needs to change. I still see it all the time. I see it in the media. I see people talking this kind of absolute misunderstanding of our Indigenous people in this country. All of the horrible stereotypes, we have to know our history if we're going to be able to move forward now and into the future in a real way.
And I'm sure it's also empowering, because you mentioned people like Tribe Called Red. If you see someone who looks like you achieving, it also helps the youth, especially.
Especially, I've traveled to so many reserves across this country, and if there's one thing that is common is the love of laughter among the people, even in the toughest reserves, and also the sheer creativity and just the desire to create, whether it's music or on the computer or sewing, et cetera, et cetera. There's just the artistic sensibilities of these youth that I see across the country are astounding.
Proceeds from this book go to a camp that you help run for James Bay youth. What does this camp offer them?
This is called Camp Anakwan. It's my dear friends William and Pamela Tozer have been running it for years, and I've been trying to help out in any way I can. It's a camp where, again, the suicide rates in Moosonee and Moose Factory and Fort Albany and Saskatchewan and Attawapskat can be astronomical. And something fascinating we have to remember is that before contact, suicide was almost unheard of in the Cree communities. Now it's sometimes 100 times higher than the national average. What we do is we get youth out onto the land, learn how to build a simple fire, paddle a canoe, catch a fish, play volleyball with your friends in a safe environment that's beautiful on the Abitibi River, isolated, a safe, good place that challenges you to rediscover your blood memory, to claim your birthright, which is the land of the Cree, the Mushkegwa Cree. We've been there for 10,000, thousands of years. This is your birthright. And what we find is when we bring students out there the first day or two, no cell phones, no TV, what are you talking about? But within days, they're just loving it, and the vast majority always want to come back. So we get them out on the land. I
just wanted to pick up on something you just said before there was no suicide. Do you think that we talked about intergenerational trauma? Do you think, because now you're eliminating the shame factor, you're letting them know you're great, you're perfect just the way you are?
Exactly, and we do different projects with the youth. Like, for example, we're starting a project where when the youth come and stay for a week, the first day there's a drum maker there who gives them all the materials and teaches them how to make a hand drum, and by the end of the week, they're made their own drum and singing a song in their own language. It's this kind of rebuilding of what was taken away with language. All of the things that make you prideful and proud of where you come from and who you are. You know, I do a history class, an Indigenous history class with the students for the week, explain to them that without you, Canada would not be a nation. Without this area, this was the cradle of the fur trade. This is what our whole country is built on right here. You are as responsible for Canada as Canada is for you. And you know, we do all kinds of wonderful kind of reclamation of cultural things, whether it is sewing moccasins, learning songs in your language, learning the bush. You know, we'll have a week where they build the skegans, which are winter shelters, and sleep in it in the winter overnight and realize this is better than, warmer than it is at home, kind of thing. And so it's kind of giving back to the youth the things that make them feel whole and understand that wow, I am important.
Celebrating them.
It is a celebration. It's a beautiful place, and William and Pamela Tozer are just this amazing, amazing couple who, you know, without them, this camp couldn't work.
And we talked about your friend, Gord Downey. That's so cool that you get to call him your friend. He played a little concert in Kingston a few months ago. Only 11.7 million Canadians tuned
Just
in.
1 in 3. And I think
Just
it's probably a lot more than that.
To some people. But here's a clip from it.
We're in good hands, folks. Real good hands. He cares about the people way up north that we were trained our entire lives to ignore. Trained our entire lives to hear not a word of what's going on up there. But what's going on up there ain't good. It's maybe worse than it's ever been. So it's not on the improve, and we're going to get it fixed. But we got the guy to do it, to start, to help.
So you were actually standing or sitting right beside the Prime Minister?
Yeah.
What was your reaction to that moment when you saw it?
Well, I was the one wearing the glasses, and when Gord mentioned the North, I raised my fist high. Because I knew, you know, I wanted him, I knew that he had this huge chance, and he was hinting that I'm going to do something, I want to do something that last concert that is positive. And he did, you know. I think he moved the dialogue ahead 5 years in this country by making that statement. People are like, what's he talking about, the North, and what's going on up there?
And why do you think that is?
Because now people who might not normally hear about some of these issues are going to tune in and be like, oh, wow. So I think just by his simple statement, and now he's following up, you know, he's got the Gord Downey Chanie Wenjak Fund, Chanie Wenjak Fund, and their hope is to raise $100 million in order to continue building bridges of reconciliation in this country, whether it is through programs, schooling I know is really important to them, education, which I think is the foundation of everything in terms of change and positive. So I think, you know, what he's doing is brilliant and amazing, and I'm really, really proud of him for doing that.
Now, if you could say one thing to the Prime Minister, what would it be?
It's going to be a long, slow road. It's going to be painful because you can't make everyone, you know, everyone's not going to agree, but it's absolutely the most vital thing that we can do is to have reconciliation in this country. And I think he knows that, and I think he knows that we've all got to be in it for the long run.
We talk about truth and reconciliation. Telling Chanie's story is the truth part, but what does reconciliation look like for you?
Well, if you're an Indigenous person, if you're an Indigenous woman, reconciliation is being able to walk down the street and not fear for your life of being murdered. Indigenous women are 4 times more likely to be murdered in this country. If you're an Indigenous parent, I think reconciliation for that person is not having to fear that when you wake up in the morning, you're going to find your child dead and hanging in a closet of suicide. I think reconciliation for an Indigenous kid is being able to turn on a tap of water like the rest of Canada and actually drink that cup of water. So many reserves are without running water or have been under water boil advisories for decades. And it's this kind of thing that, you know, as Canadians, we have to understand. And this isn't the Indigenous person's fault. People are like, oh, what's wrong with those people? Just make them move down south and they'll be fine. That is not the case at all. There's a real imbalance in this country. There's a level, the playing field has never been level for Indigenous people, but it's time for us to make that level. And it comes down to education is key. If I may say one more thing about that.
Of course.
Provincially, Funding for students on reserve in Ontario is half what it is for students who don't live on reserves. And so it's not a matter of we're just giving these pouring money into these reserves and they're just throwing it away and the chiefs building big giant mansions. I've heard all of this racist nonsense for years. It is that the playing field isn't level and it needs to be.
So who do you think perpetuates those stereotypes?
Those who've never met a Native person or been to a reserve or there's a lot of hateful, spiteful people, unfortunately, and I want to believe they are the minority in this country. I believe they are, but they can be really loud when things get tough. If you go back to Idle No More and start reading any of the comment sections in the Globe and Mail or any of the major magazines and newspapers, it was horrendous.
I think CBC had to turn off comments at one point.
Yeah, if you don't believe there's a racist undertone and underclass in this country, then yeah, just look at that. CBC has had to not allow comments on any Indigenous stories in this country. So something is broken, and we Canadians are the ones who have to fix it, and that's going to come from our reaching out and saying, no, not do you need anything, but teach me about you. And I think, that this kind of let me help you is lovely and wonderful, but sometimes that person that you least expected is going to teach you a lot more than you would ever have imagined.
Well, Joseph, it's been really great getting a chance to meet you and to talk about the book.
It's wonderful to meet you, thank you.
And happy birthday.
Thanks.
You're the big 5-0.
Yeah, I made it.
Thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks a lot.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.